Global Muchidão, realizing just transitions. Welcome to the German Climate Pavilion at COP30 in Belyndar.
A very warm welcome to what might be the most important side event that you are attending at COP30 this year, and that is this and that is the side event titled "The ICJ has ruled: States' obligations to close the ambition gap." This event is co-hosted by several German youth organizations, and I'm extremely grateful that we all joined hands to put this event together. That's the Bund Jugend, the Klimadelegation, the Katholische Landjugendbewegung, and World's Youth for Climate Justice. My name is Jule Schnakenberg, and I am the moderator for today's session. It is an honor to have so many distinguished panelists with us. And we also would like to welcome our friends who are joining us live in Berlin. Hundreds of young people watching live, so no pressure, but there's many more eyes on you than the ones that you can see in the room. Can I just get a sign of hands? Who's a lawyer in this room? All right, no pressure, but we gotta be legally accurate, my friends. Thank you very much. This is not a panel targeted to lawyers. This is really for, well, lawyers too, and policymakers who are looking at how we can use what the International Court of Justice has said in and across negotiation streams. The International Court of Justice has ruled in what many call the biggest case in history, a climate ruling this summer. And that case came from a group of law students, 27 from the University of the South Pacific. And it is extremely special to have one of the 27 on the panel today, so we'll hear more about the origin story from Belyndar in just a second. The case was diplomatically championed by the government of Vanuatu and then spearheaded by a coalition of states ranging from the Pacific to the Caribbean and African states. In the beginning, so this case has until now taken about 6 years. And in the beginning, it was Belyndar and a few others dreaming about something that seemed impossible. But quite early on, the German government joined what they called a core group in New York that negotiated a resolution that would include a question that could be sent to the judges in The Hague. So Germany was involved from the beginning, and that is particularly interesting for today's session. So we are interested to hear how Germany is now approaching the ruling and incorporating that in the negotiations. For those who've not read 140 pages of the advisory opinion, we'll give you a very brief rundown. The court has clarified that 1.5 degrees is the absolute legal and moral red line. The advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice, or ICJ for short, has spoken that, and they could have not been clearer, that limiting 1.5 degrees of global warming, as set out in the Paris Agreement, is an absolute legal obligation to prevent harm to people and the planet. And reality shows that we are very far from that, and that is why we are assembled here today to try to think deeply and thoroughly about ways we can close this dangerous ambition gap. And I am joined by panelists who will hopefully have some answers for us today. The court also emphasized, and that is of particular interest, considering we've got a very international panel and we are working in an international space. And that is the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. And the court said that countries with capacity, that developed countries have a higher legal obligation and carry historical responsibility. But now I'll introduce the panelists, and then I have questions for you, so get ready. We are joined today by Belyndar Rikimani, who is one of the 27, and also the head of research and policy at the Pacific Island Students Fighting Climate Change. We're also joined by Zachary Phillips, and I'm fangirling over here. Zachary was involved in the ICJ, as a part of the ICJ delegation for Antigua and Barbuda. He's working at the Attorney General's office in Antigua and Barbuda, and was also involved in the climate proceedings before the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, and that is based in Germany also. So you were part of 2 historic climate rulings already, Zach. We are also joined by Jennifer Tolman from the German Federal Foreign Office, apologies, and she's the team lead for multilateral and European climate cooperation. We have excuses from Konrad, who is unfortunately not able to be here with us today. His face is all over the flyers. You'll see in a second. Jennifer, of course, it's not Konrad, but we are honored that and very grateful you're able to come on a short notice. And then finally, very excited that Dr. Amiera Sawas was able to join us here today. And she's with the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative, which is an incredibly exciting initiative that I'm glad we're able to link to the ICJ ruling today. And she is the head of research and policy for the FFNPT. All right, enough of me. Now we get to the more interesting piece, and that is the questions. And because, Belyndar, I've mentioned briefly, you've worked on this for 6+ years. Big thank you from the audience for you. So this must feel surreal that this is the first COP. We are talking about a climate ruling that is no longer hypothetical, but it really has come out. So I'll take a seat. But the question, because we saw it's not just lawyers in the room, so the question we have for you is, if you can summarize for the non-lawyers in the room what the ICJ has said on countries' legal obligations to mitigate and achieve the 1.5 degrees. Thank
you. Okay. Thank you for that very nice introduction. Hello, everyone. I'm very humbled to be here, and Pacific greetings to you all that are here with us in this room. Back to your question, Eula. I think one of the things that we could talk about regarding what that we need to share about is we could clearly see that in this advisory opinion, the court has affirmed the I think one of the things that our communities have known for a very long time, and that is the 1.5 degrees. In the advisory opinion, the court has clearly stated that limiting the warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius is not a political slogan. I would say it is a legal obligation. It is a legal duty, and that every state have a duty under international law to take concrete science-based steps to must align their ambitions to the 1.5 pathway and to cooperate so that no countries are left behind. So I believe that's one of the strongest reference that the court has made and has clarified in the ICJ advisory opinion. And another thing is also, I think, in terms of equity and capability that do not erase responsibility, which is the CBDR, it also affirmed that what that means stronger action and support from those greater historical emissions. It shows that they have no excuse for delay. It really clearly shows that they need to step up for more climate actions from their part, and to scale up the support for finance, technology, as well as capacity building as part of their legal obligations. So those are 2 points that I would like to share in terms of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Belyndar. Zachary, as mentioned, you are part of multiple of these climate proceedings that have come out within the past year. So my question is, if you could connect the dots for us, what did ITLO say and what did the ICJ say that can be combined to deliver us clarity to know what to do over there? Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Is everyone hearing me? All right, great. So as you had said, I was involved with the ITLOS advisory opinion as well, and just a quick overview of that process. Antigua and Barbuda, as well as Tuvalu, had created a international organization by the name of COSIS, Commission of Small Island States. And through that vehicle, we also had a request before the International Tribunal on the Law of the Sea for an advisory opinion that asks the question whether anthropogenic GHG emissions constitute pollution under the Law of the Sea Convention. So the reason that you need to understand the context is because while I always have this rhetoric, and I think you would understand as well, while SIDS are on the front line fighting this climate crisis, we aren't just passive victims. We are actively thinking of the ways that we can move forward to a solution. So noting that the Vanuatu had started this initiative of getting an ICJ advisory opinion, we thought it would be very useful to ask for an advisory opinion from the International Tribunal on the Law of the Sea. And our colleagues in Latin America had also asked for an advisory opinion from the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. And the reason is because, in simple context, international law overlaps, interplays, and intertwines. Obligations don't exist in a silo. They exist within each of the actions that we do, and we have to be mindful of the different obligations that we are signed on to. So in relation to ITLOS and that particular question, some key issues came out. Now, the first issue that I'm going to speak about is this idea of lex specialis. So all the lawyers are going, and all the non-lawyers, lex specialis is just this simple idea that when you are speaking about one area of law, there are certain rules that govern that area, and you cannot look to other areas to influence those rules. So there was an argument, a very strong argument for many years from other non-AOSIS members who were saying that when we're speaking about climate change, you can only look at UNFCCC, Paris Agreement, Kyoto Protocol. Those are the only place that you get the rules. Now, living in an island, experiencing the effects of climate change, we are very aware that climate change is intertwined in not just, it's everything, economics, human rights, ocean governance, even development. And it's clear to us, but when we tried to communicate it in spaces like these, we were shut down. So the ITLOS advisory opinion gave us a key takeaway that said, lex specialis in the area of climate change is not the authority. There is no lex specialis. Obligations dealing with climate change derive from, yes, the Paris Agreement and UNFCCC regime, but it also derives from the Law of the Sea Convention. It derives from, the ITLOS advisory opinions focused on the Law of the Sea, but then the connection is that the ICJ went further to say it also derives from customary international law. So that was one of the building stones that was taken and built further upon. Another area was the focus that the ITLOS advisory opinion put on science. So there is a principle of due diligence where states, in exercising their obligations, must act in a way that is the most reasonable way that a state can achieve the purpose. Now, how can you ascertain what is the most reasonable way? Especially in the climate space, science. Science informs what we're supposed to do, what we shouldn't do, what we can do. Maybe it will work, maybe it won't. But what this ITLOS advisory opinion did was clarify that due diligence in the concept of international law is inextricably linked to the science that is available. And the best available science, which is a term that I'm sure everyone in this room must know by heart by now. So, again, the ICJ took that and built upon it further and gave us the authoritative advisory opinion that clarifies best available science must inform all actions that are taken in relation to climate action, both on an individual level for your state, but also collectively amongst all states. I think I'll stop there because there's so much more to discuss.
Thank you very much, Zach. International law applies in negotiation rooms. I think that is very clear. Thank you. Knowing that international law applies in the negotiation rooms, and we've had multiple great court rulings, we turn to you, Jennifer, and we are wondering how now with that clarity that developed and high-capacitated countries are asked to do more, how is Germany approaching the negotiations here differently? How are you seeing it being used already? And how are you maybe approaching domestic action? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I am sadly not Konrad Raeschke-Kessler, which also means that I am not a treaty lawyer. So I am a diplomat, and I can give you my perspective on how this is striking into diplomacy. And I think that that's actually really important, because the reality is, in a way, we now need to move from the world of the lawyers to the world of the diplomats and the cooperators and the implementers. And so actually, my part in this whole ruling, while I was there when Germany took the decision in 2022 about whether or not we would join the core group, my role has really started after this advisory opinion has been taken, to really start figuring out kind of not just what does Germany do, but actually, we still haven't had a reaction from the international community to this advisory opinion. So the very first question is, how can we bring about a welcoming of this advisory opinion that the UN General Assembly commissioned? How do we welcome it and thereby create a basis for which it can actually be more easily integrated into this process in a way that is more consensus-based, or is at least majority consensus-based? A second question is, I do think that when you start looking at kind of NDCs and obligations and all of that sort of thing, the ICJ clarifies a lot of things, but it actually also leaves a lot open. So I do actually think one of the first next steps that we need, whether in this format, in our bilateral conversations, or in New York, is a conversation about what due diligence looks like. Right? We don't, it gives us some of the elements, but we haven't really had that conversation yet. And I think very concretely bringing that back here to Belém, bringing that back here to COP, the question for me really becomes, how do we start operationalizing that idea in a 1.5 action plan, or a response to the gap that we're seeing in the NDCs? Because that is very much where we could start operationalizing the duty to cooperate, where we could start operationalizing what we feel due diligence looks like, in a way that is still nationally determined, but that actually kind of brings us into a conversation about how we change how we cooperate. And I think that's one of the things that, as Germany, we're really interested in being in dialogue with here in Belém. But we're also really seeing this as a journey that has to continue beyond Belém, that is really about the conversations that we take out of this COP, not just the conversations we have at this COP. I think I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you very much. So more work for us, not just here, but also New York, I hear. Thank you very much, Jennifer. The ICJ was very strong on its language on fossil fuels. They spoke about production and financing and licensing. And that is what, Amiera, what you work on day to day. So my question is, now that the ICJ has said countries have the obligation to prevent harm to people and the planet, how do we tie that to fossil fuels and the treaty initiative that you work on? Where is the connection?
Okay, thank you. I will try not to talk for too long, because this is a big topic, but I think there's some context factors that we should start with, and many of you will be aware of those, but it's always important to go back to those. So science has proven that around 86% of the carbon in our atmosphere over the last decade comes from the burning of fossil fuels. It took 30 years to get the words fossil fuels into the climate change negotiations. And there's about 120% more fossil fuel production planned than is actually compatible with reaching our 1.5 degree target, which we're crashing through as we speak. So this is the context we're in when this ICJ advisory opinion has come out, which is very important for the movement for climate justice, because the court recognized that anthropogenic climate change stems primarily from fossil fuels. So this can't be denied any longer. It's in the science, but now it's in the legal rulings. And these findings were also complemented by the court explaining that fossil fuel production, licensing, and subsidies may constitute an internationally wrongful act. So this clarification can be used as a strong ground and precedent in litigation going forward against states that are committing wrongful acts and not meeting their obligations required under international law. And I think we'll start to see a proliferation of litigations with the support of this advisory opinion and the prior ones. The other context factor I do want to share, since we're sat in the German Pavilion, I promise I'm not picking on you, but context matters. So Germany has approved, according to Oil Change International, the highest amount of fossil fuel financing of the G7, providing 1.5 billion for 12 projects since the end of 2022. The G7 obviously made a commitment to end international public finance for fossil fuels by the end of 2022 under the Clean Energy Transition Partnership, but it's not happening. And overall, the signatories to that partnership have approved at least 7 billion in public finance for international fossil fuel projects since its own deadline passed. So we're in a context where commitments are made, but action is not following through. And we're in a context where multilateralism is really on its knees. And what we need right now is breakthrough leadership in order to show that it is possible to move away from fossil fuels in a way which centers justice and equity. And the advisory opinion is very important from that perspective because it also talks about human rights and due diligence, as Jenny was saying. So states failing to actually act now can be litigated against. So this clarifies the role of fossil fuels in the existing international law framework, and the need to phase out fossil fuels or transition away from fossil fuels is now clearly mandated and thus must become, and it will, a measurable global target. So this is now helping us to make the case, right? That we have to be much more explicit about the cause, and we can be productive and constructive about addressing the cause of the crisis. And the court also suggested that cooperation between states is the very foundation of meaningful international efforts with respect to climate change, and that treaties and their coordinated forms of implementation are a principal expression of this cooperation, strengthening the case for international cooperation through a new treaty on fossil fuels, which can explicitly address fossil fuel production. So what we're trying to do as the Fossil Fuel Treaty, which has been championed and led by small island developing states, who are the most affected by the crisis and did the least to cause it, is to set out a work plan that's constructive, that can address the barriers to phasing out fossil fuel production, because there are many barriers faced by countries across the global south, those who are both producing and consuming fossil fuels, and those barriers are inherent in an unjust global system, right, which is making the financing almost impossible for many regions to do economic diversification, to invest in renewable energy transition. But now, because we have this ruling, we can use that to make the case more effectively for a transition through a fossil fuel treaty, which will actually have a work plan. And that work plan has to have equity at its heart, and that's global equity, and it's also local equity. So there are different ways we're looking at that. Global equity is about the most responsible states moving the first and the fastest, right? And they have to also put their fair share of finance towards the transition. The second part of fairness and equity is about equity within states. And there are many different stakeholders who haven't historically been consulted and participating in the transition away from fossil fuels. And we can use a treaty to put safeguards in place and opportunities to create new forms of participation and consultation so that indigenous nations, women, people living under oppression and marginalization can have more access to this new treaty instrument to actually kind of say what they want to see. And we've seen that ourselves. We've done consultations with different stakeholders across civil society, workers, women and indigenous peoples and so on, just to understand what they want to see in the formulation of a new treaty. And for them, it's about the public good, it's about rights, and it's about accountability. And that's something that the participating nations will be creating in this treaty. So I'll stop there because I can talk for a very long time about this, but happy to talk more later. Thanks.
Thank you, Amiera. And it will be interesting to those who've not yet read and not followed 2 weeks of proceedings in The Hague at the end of last year, that in fact many states brought up the treaty as one of the ways that reparations could be due by countries. Zachary, next question to you. You are also here with the AOSIS delegation. And so now that this is the first COP after this historic ruling, and we absolutely need the 1.5, and multiple of you have mentioned this. What is AOSIS thinking now? What do other countries, what are we expecting from other countries in this process now that we have that legal clarity, and potentially, in particular, from developed country parties? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that spicy question. I think I'll start by answering by taking off my AOSIS hat. I'm putting on my Caribbean borderline youth hat to say that a reality of my life, a reality of my existence has always been hurricanes. People hear, see about it, read about it every year, and it becomes just a news item for others. But for those of us who live and experience and have that reality, we see the increase that has been caused by climate change. Never in anyone in the Caribbean, my life, in my life, last year, 2024, within 24 hours, Hurricane Beryl started as a tropical storm, and within 24 hours, it was a Category 4 hurricane before it destroyed the shores of St. Vincent and the Grenadines and continued on through Barbados, through Jamaica. Now, that is not normal. A lot of people expect, you're from the Caribbean, you know what this is like, you know what your life is. Yes, I know what hurricanes are like. I know what to do when a hurricane is on its way. But I do not know what to do where within 24 hours, a storm goes from category, not even a category, from a tropical storm to a Category 4. What do you do? How do you prepare? How do you adapt? Since there's adaptation, resilience that we're always told about. Recently, Jamaica had to deal with one of the, I think it was, if my memory serves correct, the 5th strongest storm ever in the Atlantic basin. And not only did they have to deal with the 5th strongest storm, they had to deal with a slow-moving Category 5 hurricane. Now, explaining that to a person who is not from the region, who has not ever experienced a typhoon or a storm or whatever word you use in your culture, I guarantee you cannot understand. But what I am telling you here is that those of us who do understand still cannot understand what we are facing now. So I say that to say it is more than just action that we want in rooms in Belém or in New York. We want support, not from a place of concessional loans. We want support, not from a place where Antigua and Barbuda is considered high income, so there's a limit as to how fast we can rebuild or what access we get to rebuild. We want support not from a place of persons looking on the news screen and wonder, well, why didn't those people just go to another island? Why did they stay there in the path of the storm? Some hurricanes are large enough to cover multiple countries in the Eastern Caribbean. There is nowhere to go. And when we come here once a year to discuss in these rooms and bring up these issues, we are told, well, you're a high-income country, so there's a limit to how much finance you can get. Or we're told, last year you were given X loan to recover from X existential shock. So is it really your turn to get another loan? You should manage your systems better. You should implement systems that you can keep your financial or fiscal reporting up to standard so we can give you more loans. That, putting back on my AOSIS hat, that needs to stop. Really and truly, that needs to stop. I am not saying that there is a end-all and be-all, a silver bullet that will solve the problem, but I do think that without saying it, there are decisions that are made in these rooms that, if we're looking at it, removing all the meats, bare bones, these decisions are condemning a group of people to either no longer being able to live in the home that they were born in, or to a oppressive cycle of debt and poverty that they did not contribute to and must continue to engage with and continue to literally beg for assistance for. And I don't know how to communicate the reality outside of the diplomacy in any more of an honest way than that. But literally, we are coming here to beg for support for our existence. And I cannot fathom how this can continue. And I believe the ICJ advisory opinion needs to be taken in more than just a tool to be used to get text on a paper. It needs to be taken on its ethos, its core, that justice has to be given to those who are not receiving it. I hope that answers the question.
It definitely does for the audience. Thank you, Zach. Same question for Belyndar. Now that after so many years this ruling is here, what are the Pacific Island students expecting to see differently across negotiation streams? And maybe, if you have a call to action for the audience, and I'm getting signals, we have to just speed things up a little bit. So if you can keep it to 2 minutes so that we can get some Q&A. Thank you, Belyndar.
Okay. Thank you, Yudla. I think just adding on to what Zachary have shared, reflecting back on the AO, the advisory opinion has kind of laid out a blueprint for stronger climate actions, I would say. And I think in terms of mitigation, there's so many things that we want to see out of these negotiations. Like coming from the island states, we are the front line of this climate crisis. We have faced it every day. And it has been our call for the past years to see new developments, new climate actions that kind of help us address the issues that we face. So I think this advisory opinion is a tool that states can now use to align their ambition, that can, I think, align their ambition with the science that we have, that was provided by the IPCC. The first thing that I would want to see out of this negotiation. Secondly, is to have a robust loss and damage finance support so that we can be able to finance the, make us to have stronger NDCs as well. That's another thing. And I think lastly is to scale up technology, capacity building, as well as pragmatic support. We need those. Back in the Pacific, we don't have those. We have very low capacity. Therefore, we need those support in order for us to help us address the climate impacts that we have been facing. So I believe these are three things that I would like to see coming out from the negotiations that we have that are ongoing at the moment.
Thank you very much, Belyndar. Very clear. So I hope you have all taken some notes and are going to go implement that just next door. Thank you, Belyndar. Dr. Amiera, to come back to you. You've spoken about the treaty. What else is needed to really get that, that phase out that we need, that the treaty is also advocating for? Besides signing the treaty, what else can high-income developed country parties do to unravel that structure?
So we have to, again, we really have to focus on what the barriers are. Like, there are systemic barriers to this transition, and we have to be, this is supposed to be the COP of truth, right? So let's be real. The barriers for countries across the global south are not only deeply unjust, but impossible. how can you, as let's say a country on the African continent, to get investment into a renewable energy project, having to pay 15 or 16% interest rates when countries in the global north are getting 2 to 6% interest. So we have to be real and honest with ourselves about where those barriers are. So the international financial system is it is an extension of colonialism, which is why the debt crisis is escalating. What we can see now is regions of the world across the global south who have been extracted and exploited from by Europe, by North America, by the global north historically through colonialism and subsequently, are benefiting from the opportunities of a transition whilst continuing to extract in a way which is exacerbating debt. So, Hurricane Beryl is one example that's just devastating. I think it was over 30 billion USD in damages just in a couple of days. In Pakistan, in like 2 days, over 30 billion USD in damages, in floods which were driven by climate change. So we have to get behind the movements for macroeconomic justice. And I'm not saying it's easy to just say, oh, let's cancel the debt. It's a difficult thing to do, but it's not impossible. We often border ourselves in these kind of like frameworks that we've been told to believe in terms of our economic system. We can change the economic system that we work in if we work together cooperatively. So there are like many suggestions out there from the debt justice movement about how IFIs and NDBs, credit rating agencies and others can actually shift to enable fairer financing to the global south. So I think that's one of the biggest issues. I think the second issue is just countries have to act on mitigation, because if we continue in the direction we're going, we're moving in a direction of over 3% of warming, right? Which is going to get worse, significantly worse, if we carry on this 120% fossil fuel production approach. If we don't do that, the loss and damage is going to be just immeasurable. The amount of lives that are going to be lost. And what happens when you experience a Category 5 hurricane overnight? Your entire infrastructure is wiped out. Your fiscal space is wiped out. So even if you can't access the financing because it's unfair, you then have no financing left in your budget to actually do anything about it. And that's why what we're seeing is that many countries across the world now are spending more on debt servicing alone in response to loss and damage and the escalating debt crisis than on their own health and education systems. So we have to be really real about what the problems are and how we're going to address them. In the treaty, we're doing what we can, but we see ourselves as a solution-oriented within an ecosystem. So we can't address the debt crisis unless we have all countries behind the treaty, right? It's a high-ambition coalition at the moment. One of the things we're trying to do is develop a debt resolution mechanism which can help countries to assess their debt and then challenge them, because there's actually a lot of debt out there which can now be challenged under international law as odious debt. And the countries in which most debt is actually regulated and litigated are in the UK and in the courts of New York. And so some of the movements there are calling on those courts and those systems to shift basically the regulatory frameworks so that this debt crisis won't escalate further. And I could talk much more, but I'll stop there. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. I definitely will talk to you after the panel. Jennifer, I did have another question for you, but I hear that our friends watching in Berlin also have sent in a question. So I might pass it to my colleague who got a message from our youth watching in Berlin. If you can hand over the mic, perfect.
Hello? Maybe I check. Hello? Yeah, now that's working. My name is Johanna, but yeah, I'm delivering a statement and then a question from the Youth Hub in Berlin. So I will start with this statement. While Environmental Minister Schneider from Germany applauds the current climate policy, the current trend raises serious doubts. Formally, the EU climate target of a 90% reduction in EU emissions of 2040 compared to 2005 remains in place, but this target is being watered down in many areas. Instead of 3 percentage points as before, up to 5 percentage points of the climate target can now be purchased through offsetting deals with countries outside Europe. In addition, according to the Federal Environmental Agency, Germany will miss its 1.5 degree targets by 2030. If you do a rough calculation per capita, Germany's CO2 budget for 1.5 degrees will be used by the end of this year. If you factor in the historic responsibilities and financial capabilities, Germany has long since exceeded its fair share of this budget. Last year, several non-governmental organizations once again took their case to the Federal Constitutional Court to demand the right to climate protection. These include the Bund, Friends of the Earth Germany, and the Solar Energy Promotion Association. Now the ICJAO has confirmed exactly that, meaning that even without the Constitutional Court's ruling, it is clear that Germany must do more to protect the climate. Since 2021, it has been confirmed in Germany that climate protection is a human right. So the question to Mrs. Tolman would be, you said we need more clarification how to operationalize the due diligence, but aren't these facts clear enough? So what do you say about the current trends of increasing climate ambition in Germany, decreasing climate ambition in Germany, and how is Germany committed to strengthen the ambition in Germany, but also in the EU here at COP, but also in the future? Thank you.
First of all, thank you very much for that question and also that statement. As the German government, I'm sure that we would not necessarily characterize everything in exactly that way. Certainly, we think that in international comparison, we are one of the most on track to our 2030 targets. That doesn't mean that it is perfect, and we know that more needs to be done, particularly in the transport and the building sector. But I think we are seriously working on getting it done. I think, secondly, stepping back in the EU, our climate policy is guided by science, but shaped by democracy. And at the end of the day, a big part of the next 5 years is bringing those two things back together, right? At the end of the day, we are dedicated to remaining democratic, also on our decision-making on climate. And what that means is that we are now taking the time to shape our climate policy in a way that is more socially just, that brings people along, but that also kind of gets our industries on board or back on board. Because at the end of the day, we also don't want to set targets or policies in place that we're not going to be able to implement. So we are, I think, in the middle of that just transition journey and that just transition dialogue, and having the youth, but also particularly kind of pro-climate, pro-acceleration voices as part of our public debate is incredibly important. Because at the end of the day, it is that combination of guided by science and getting to that scientific benchmark that is the 90%, but doing it in a way that is shaped by democracy. I think one really important thing to say into this room is the 90% target is something that now the vast majority of the EU ministers have committed to. That is going to be the target for 2040. The questions about how it gets implemented is a democratic conversation that we are going to be having over the next 2 to 3 years. So these are where these conversations need to be happening. How do you do this in a way that has good guardrails, that is, scientifically guided, but that takes people along with us? And that's really the responsibility here. And I think in that, we as Germany and we as Europe are trying to be very honest in the challenges that we are facing, but also very honest in the fact that we want to continue to reach that benchmark. But that it is a process, and that is something that I think unites us with a lot of our partners. I think a lot of countries in this world are facing that conversation about how do you do this in a way that is just both towards your international partners, but also towards your citizens that you have the ultimate responsibility towards. And how do you do it in a way that is guided by science and is allowing you to reach up to that benchmark? I think one thing that I would like to say that I'm afraid doesn't answer your question, but I do think is really important. On this panel, we've been talking a lot in kind of very clear white and black standards of developing. And I actually think that on the one hand, the ICJ really highlights the special vulnerability of certain countries. And kind of highlights that there is a particular responsibility towards those countries, which is very important also to Germany. But it also highlights the fact that in between the most vulnerable and the very rich developing countries, there is a new category emerging of countries that have progressed immensely in their development and that are now contributing significantly to emissions, and that those countries also have a special responsibility. So I think it's really important that when we talk about how you take responsibility in the ICJ, it is a responsibility that is falling on more than the traditional 21 Annex 1 countries in this world if we are actually going to keep the most vulnerable safe. And that does not mean that we are any less in responsibility, because we are clearly in responsibility. But it does mean that we need to widen that responsibility and have all countries step up to the maximum that they can. And I think they're coming back here to COP. How we implement the GST, how we implement the goals that we have set ourselves, including that just transition away from fossil fuels, is really important on this.
Thank you, Jennifer. We have about 10 minutes for questions and answers from the audience. I can see that there's some in the room, and that we have someone with the microphone. If you could keep it brief and say who you're directing it to, if that's okay. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Am I audible? Okay, so it's Duranaya Babar, and I'm from Chitral and Pakistan, to be more specifically. So long story short, ICJ decisions are non-binding. Everyone knows that. So I want to make it clear that we need a pathway. I want to add a suggestion. We need a pathway where we have to do lots of research in international climate change. I want this to be a new arena where we would discuss what is climate change in legal terms. And we have to define climate, for instance, criminalizing those who are greenwashing, those who are using debt as a source, and then they are, in simple way, greenwashing those things which are, in fact, in the name of climate change, they are doing it. So I want from this platform that I have also researched on these things, and if there is any platform where I could join it, where we could together we could develop a research center where we could develop this jurisprudence of international climate change, that would be a better suggestion from my part.
Thank you very much. Maybe I'll pick on one aspect from the question that you asked, or from your statement that you've made, and that's on binding and non-binding. And maybe, Zach, are you able to just respond to that? People are saying this is not a binding opinion.
The literal statement that it's not binding is correct in that there are no parties involved in the ICJ, any advisory opinion. Purpose of an advisory opinion is to give advice, but I don't think it's correct to say that because it's not binding in the strict sense that it's not useful, because the very idea of an advisory opinion is a coalition, an amalgamation of what is the law at that particular point in time. So even though it is not binding on a state or a party, it is the authoritative representation of what the law is at that point in time, which means it is extremely persuasive, right underneath the point of binding. It's just right there, and it can be used domestically among states, between individuals and their own states. It is an extremely persuasive piece of law. So I hope that assists with that particular part. And on the second part, I think that's a wonderful idea. And if you do ever get that information, please reach out to me.
Zach's inbox is open. Thank you very much. I'll take one more, and then we have a moment for final call to action from the panelists.
Yes, thank you very much, everyone, for sharing, for your very valuable contributions today. I do have a question to the last response that was made, in particular because you said, obviously, our response to climate change has to be based in democracy. Now, what we see in Europe is a strong shift towards the far right, which are obviously also not necessarily basing all the arguments in the latest available science. So what role do you see for Germany in particular, I think, to spearhead climate action still, also in the fate of the political, let's call it democratic decision-making that we're seeing?
I think that disinformation and misinformation around climate are one of the greatest risks to being able to respond to this advisory opinion. And that is something that we are noting in Europe. We've seen immense disinformation and misinformation also about the European and German energy transition in the world over the last 3 or 4 years. But we're really seeing at home that it is becoming a risk to science-based decision-making, to fact-based decision-making. And I do think that that is one of the reasons why, as Europe, there is a question about what information systems need to be regulated and what information systems need to be dealt with so that you're not incentivizing disinformation and dissent and distress. And I think that that is a conversation that we are going to have not just within the European space, but also there. Because at the end of the day, if people aren't supportive of climate action because they are being fed false information, that is a problem. But I would also like to say that one of the main issues that we are facing right now is that a lot of the media discourse in Europe is shaped by a perception that people don't support climate action, which is factually untrue. Over 90% of European citizens support greater climate action, but that isn't what we're seeing in our political or our media debates, and that is one of the key things that we also need to change. What role the German government can play is a very complex answer, so I think that might need to be taken over coffee later, but the fact that we are aware of it and that we want to play a role is very clear.
Thank you very much, and thanks for being so concise. We have a few moments for each of you, about a minute, to respond to what you've heard from the fellow panelists, and if you have a call to action for the audience for what they can do in the next 10 days that they are here. Amiera, are we okay to start with you?
Can you ask me that again? Sorry.
Yes, all good. A response to what you've heard from others, if you'd like to comment on it, and if you have a call to action for the audience for the next 10 days.
Thanks. Sorry, it's been a long few days already. My brain checked out for a second there. I think, centering the perspectives of those who are living the worst of this climate crisis is really important. So I'm really grateful to our colleagues here for sharing not only your brilliant work, but also what it's like to live and experience this, because we have to have a human face to these discussions. We have to humanize each other. That's the basis for cooperation. We have to understand and empathize and help each other. So firstly, a thank you. Secondly, Jenny and I have known each other for a while. I respect you a lot, and I really hear some of the challenges that the government has to face. And I think there is, a debate or ideas perhaps we can exchange on how to support governments to be more, to act faster on some of these challenges around disinformation, around how you engage the public more effectively. And one thing, I guess, a call to action, which I'm involved in quite actively here, which, it would be great for the EU to take a strong position on in the Just Transition Work Programme, the G77 plus China plus the LDCs, plus many of the blocs are calling for a just transition mechanism, which will facilitate just transition activities, cooperation, knowledge exchange, which can address some of the challenges that we've talked about today in the longer term. And it will be the first time that justice is actually formally recognized within a mechanism within this space. And so the EU could, take a stronger position on supporting that call, which is very strongly the need for that, and the opportunities of this just transition mechanism has been really coherently and strongly expressed by blocs across the global south. And so taking a step towards that, to that institutional measure, is a sign of seriousness of northern blocs, with all of the diversities that you mentioned before, Jenny, I appreciate, but that is a measure of taking the concept of justice seriously within this space. And so that's something many of us, all of the constituencies, we've been working together on this all year as well. There's real coherence there, and we really hope that the EU can get behind it. Thanks.
Hello? Yes. I guess my call is, well, we have different persons in the audience. Some of us are here as delegates and are participating in negotiations on a day-to-day. So I suppose my call for those persons would be to support the outcomes of the ICJ. And I hesitate to say, putting back on my AOSIS hat, supporting the outcome doesn't simply mean saying the ICJ said this, so we need to put it in text. Digest what the ICJ has said. Understand what it means for states. Understand what it means for your state, depending on where you are from. And then text becomes action. So in the negotiation rooms, think about how this particular phrase, word, language, paragraph that you have gotten from the ICJ or have read from or have heard from these discussions, what will that translate to tangibly for the persons who are affected? So again, a wide range of persons in the audience. So for you, that may mean supporting developing states as they make suggestions about wider a range of finance or easier accessible finance. For some, it may mean actually going into negotiations and engaging with the language that we can have tangible outcomes that make it easier for our partners to support, list out what we need. So those are for the negotiators. For the civil society members, I would say your role is extremely useful to SIDS and LDCs. I would say as important as the states who made the representations before the ICJ were the civil society members who got the information out there, who led that campaign, whether it was on the media, social media, real life, etc. Civil society members, keep supporting us and hold your own people to account. Wherever you are from, do not think that because you are a member of a civil society, that is enough and you have done what you need to do. Also interrogate your own actions, interrogate the actions of those around you, because it's not as simple as deciding a text on a paper. We also have to change the way we think about things. We have to change our view on fossil fuels, on plastics. These are luxuries of life, and we have to make sure that we are not buying into the same thing that causes the problem. And for non-delegates, non-civil society members, persons who are here for the media, etc., thank you for coming, thank you for listening to our story, and keep supporting in whatever way you deem fit. Thanks.
Spot on. Thank you.
Yeah, I think for me, I believe that all of us have a part to play in this fight for climate justice. And moving forward in the next intense 10 days of negotiations, I would also like to raise that our colleagues have created a pocket guide that we would like negotiators to use. If you don't know how to reference the AO, you would like to know more about how you could use the AO, there is a pocket guide that has been made in place. As you can see, Eula is holding. We would like to see that be taken into negotiations. So we really highly advise that if you want to know more about the AO and how you could use it in the negotiation rooms, you could come and talk to us. We'll be happy to share the pocket guide and also bring awareness around it as we move forward in the next couple of days that we're heading towards COP. And also, we also have a partnership call as well, that we're looking for partners who would like to be a part of the campaign, to be on board of it as we move on the second phase of the implementation of the ICJ advisory opinion. So this is a call, and if you want resources, don't hesitate to reach out. We have a good bunch of lawyers that are always on standby to support on real time and even here at COP with any questions that you might want to know around how to use the ICJ advisory opinion in negotiations or your advocacy. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think before I do a call to action, I wanted to just pick up on particularly what Zachary has said, but also parts of what Amiera has said. I think completely irrespective of the advisory opinion, it is very clear that the financing that we have right now does not work for SIDS, period. And there have been some decisions already taken over the last couple of years here that could help improve that, not fix it completely, but improve it, including minimum allocation floors, efforts to harmonize processes, efforts around debt pauses. Those are not the silver bullet solutions, but they need to be implemented because they will at least get us away there. And it is a problem that we need to continue working on, because at the end of the day, it's not about, the shiny advisory opinion. It's about helping the people on the ground.
And I think that is a central part of it. And so engage on the finance piece, ask us to implement what we have all agreed, hold us to account on that collectively and individually in the countries that you are from. I think that is incredibly important. So that is partly a call to action. I think the second call to action, stepping back, kind of taking off my Germany hat, I think over the next couple of years, how we tackle climate change will be very much shaped about how we keep space open for cooperation. And of course, there will be conflict situations as well. And of course, you know, we're already seeing lawsuits and all those sorts of things. And those can be very important kind of instruments for different groupings. But at the end of the day, if we do not cooperate on this issue, we do not solve it. And so when you think about how you follow up on this ICJ opinion, I think Amiera's words were actually very, very important. To be able to work together, we need to be able to empathize with each other. And that means that stepping back, also think about how your follow-up on the ICJ creates more room for cooperation, not less. Thank you. Thank you. Incredibly strong calls to action. So I am absolutely certain you all took notes. There's nothing left for me to say, but the same chant we've been doing for 6 years is always an AO, let's go. So I will say AO, and you have to give me a very strong, empowered, courageous, let's go, okay? AO. Let's go. Okay, we can do a little bit better, and then we end. No worries. Okay, AO. Let's go. Okay, thank you very much.
Global ICJAO, realizing just transitions. Welcome to the German Climate Pavilion at COP30 in Belyndar.
Falls du was sagen willst.
Ich glaube, jetzt haben wir alle Leute, die ich wollte. Danke.
Ich habe so dafür gekämpft.
Okay, tut mir leid. All right, everyone here who should be there? Okay.